So we're going to look at Chapter 18, Social Psychology of the David Myers 8th edition psychology textbook. So this is going to be part 1. Again, this is just a preview of what we're going to go over in this unit. So because we don't live by ourselves, we really have to deal with society. And so social psychology is trying to think scientifically about thinking about, influencing, and relating to one another. So when we look at social thinking, like let's look at a kid as absent. So does his absenteeism signify illness, laziness, or a stressful work environment? Was all the horrible stuff that we saw in 9/11 the work of crazed, evil people, or was it ordinary people corrupted by life events? And so social thinking tries to look at thinking about others, especially when they engage in doing things that are pretty unexpected. So the attribution theory is by Heiner, and what he suggested is that we have a tendency to give casual explanations for someone's behavior, often by crediting either the situation or the person's disposition. So what we tend to do is we try to give an excuse for why someone's behaving that way. And sometimes it's a positive thing, and sometimes it's a negative thing. So sometimes we blame the person, sometimes we blame the situation that they're in. So when we look at a dispositional attribution or a situational attribution, so a teacher may wonder whether a child's hostility reflects an aggressive personality, that's their disposition, that's their personality, or is it really just a reaction to a stressful or abusive day? So that would be a situational thing. So if it's something that you always are, that's your disposition, and so we have dispositional attribution. Now if it's something that's like temporary, something that could be based on a situation, that would be something that is just a situational attribution. So dispositions are enduring personality traits. So if Joe is a quiet, shy, and introverted child, he is likely to be that in a number of situations. Now, fundamental attribution error also occurs. So this is the tendency to overestimate the impact of a person's disposition and underestimate the impact of the situation in analyzing the behavior of others. So we see a fundamental attribution error that occurs. So you might see Joe is a real quiet, shy, and introverted person most of the time. But whenever he's around his friends, he's pretty talkative, loud, and extroverted. So fundamental attribution error is like when we try and look at someone's disposition, their personality, and we try and underestimate that impact that situations might actually have on a person's behavior. So we look at the effects of attribution. So how we explain someone's behavior affects how we react to it. So when we look at negative behavior, like situational attribution, maybe that driver is really sick. And so you actually would tolerate the situation going on. So maybe the person's driving a little crazy because they're sick and they need to get to the hospital. Now, you could look at this as a disposition. So this is this person's personality. That's a crazy driver. And you get angry and you get the angry eyes. And then you have an unfavorable reaction to it. You might, speed up, race past the person. You might give them a dirty look. So we look at things sometimes as situational. We're normally willing to kind of like excuse things, but if it's someone's disposition, we might actually get a little angry about it. So attitude is a belief and feeling that predisposes a person to respond in a particular way to objects other than people and events. So if we believe a person's mean, we might actually start acting that way towards a person. We might start disliking the person and act in an unfriendly manner because we're looking at their attitude and we're just judging them by that. So our attitude predicts our behaviors imperfectly because other factors actually are counted in here, like external stuff that could influence your behavior. So when you look at Democratic leaders like who supported President Bush's attack on Iraq under public pressure, at least this is what they said, and then they said, however, we had our private reservations when we went home at night to kiss our kids. So attitudes can affect action. Not only do people stand for what they believe in, that's their attitude, they start believing in what they stand for. And so when you talk about team and we talk about teamwork, if you really believe in the team, then your whole attitude, your whole body actually starts to react that way. So your attitudes and your actions do affect each other. So small requests, large requests. This is that foot in the door phenomenon. So in the Korean War, Chinese communists solicited cooperation from the U.S. Army soldiers by asking them to do little small things. And then they would start getting them to do bigger things as time went on. So that's that foot in the door. You get someone to agree to something small at first, and then later they comply and they keep going for the larger request because you got your foot in the door. And now people are willing to go for something bigger. So you ask your mom for $20, and then you pay her back immediately the next time you get your paycheck. And then the next time, you ask for $50, and your mom's like, well, she did it before, she gave me $20. And so then your mom does that foot in the door phenomenon. So we're going to look at Zimbardo and the Stanford prison experiment, and you need to know it. So Philip Zimbardo is a famous social psychologist, and what he did was he took Stanford University students and he assigned them the role of guards and prisoners. And their experiment went crazy. And so what ended up happening with Zimbardo in the experiment is that the guards started to internalize the role of guards, and they started to abuse the prisoners, and the prisoners started to internalize the role as prisoners. They felt depressed, they were down, beaten, and because this stuff started happening, what Zimbardo says is that we develop role appropriate attitudes. So if somebody calls you constantly stupid, lazy, no good, Zimbardo said that you would internalize that and start acting as it. So why do actions affect attitudes? One explanation is that when our attitudes and actions are opposed, we experience tension. And whenever we experience tension, this is called cognitive dissonance. And so what you look at is when we need to actually relieve ourselves of this tension, we bring our attitudes closer to actions. So if you believe you're a real charitable person and somebody's panhandling on the side of the street, if you're a real charitable person, you would give them water, maybe you give them some food, maybe you would give them a couple dollars. So cognitive dissonance. So Fiona's attitude, tuition here is too high. And so what's going to happen is the awareness that her attitude and her behavior is inconsistent. You know, her behavior is she realizes that schools need money, but her attitude is the tuition's too high. Eventually her body has got to come actually to some sort of resolution, and so maybe the school has a point, maybe she eventually comes to that. Now if that's not going to happen, what ends up happening is that the behavior is actually going to have to switch. So if her attitude is tuition here is too high, then she's going to have to start looking at, you know, oh well, the school could make cutbacks here, here, and here. So social influence, the greatest contribution of social psychology is the study of attitudes, beliefs, decisions, and actions and the way they are molded by social influence. So, you know, banking on the youth market, be like your friends and express your individuality, open, tattoos and piercing. You know, social influence. The reason why tattoos and piercing became so popular is because people influenced other people. As soon as your friend got a tattoo, you wanted a tattoo. As soon as your friend got a new car, you wanted a new car. Okay. So conformity and obedience. So behavior is contagious, and it's molded by by us following one another. And so you kind of see this with subs. You know, when one kid starts acting up in front of the sub, it's kind of like a spark that's ignited throughout the room, and the rebellion starts. So other behaviors may be expressions of compliance towards obedience, towards authority. So we look at conformity and we look at obedience. Conformity is adjusting one's behavior or thinking to coincide with the group standard. And so in this group, when we look at Confederate, what they did was they had a Confederate who knew about the experiment going in there and rubbing his face. And he was rubbing his face, and then they started noticing that other people started rubbing their face as well. And then when he's shaking his foot, we started to notice that other people were shaking their foot as well. So the Confederate doing it actually made people other do it. It's like if I say sneeze, cough, like it's unconscious, a lot of people do it. It's that chameleon effect. People just start adjusting their behavior to fit the group. So this is Ash's line experiment. So suggestibility is a subtle type of conformity and adjusting our behavior or thinking towards some group standards. So Ash would have a Confederate, a guy who knew about the experiment, go in to a group and try and pressure people into thinking that these lines are the same. And so what ends up happening is he finds out that there does need to be a group, and odd numbers kind of work in his favor. So if he could get one of his Confederates in there, the guy that knows about the experiment, and tries to get other people to start following, start believing that these lines are actually the same length, then other people start falling and caving in too. So conditions of strength and conformity. One is made to feel incompetent or insecure. The group has to have at least 3 people, so it doesn't need to be 2 people, because in a group of 2, you know, you just agree to disagree. The group has to be unanimous. So if in this group of 3, if 2 people already agree that the lines are the same, that other person, that third person, feels inclined to go ahead and agree. One admires the group's status and attractiveness. So if you think the group's cool or the group has some sort of power that you crave, you kind of will lean towards the group. One has no prior commitment or any sort of response. So you don't feel passionate one way or another. The group observes one's behavior, and one's culture strongly encourages respect for social standards. So reasons for conformity. There's normative social influence and there's informative social influence. In normative social influence, influence resulting from a person's desire to gain approval or avoid rejection. And this is just a person might respect what is the normal behavior, and they feel that there will be a severe price to pay if they're not actually respected, if they don't respect what the normal group says. Now, informative social influences, the group might provide some valuable information, but stubborn people will never listen to the opinions of others. So it's like 12 Angry Men. The one juror that kept holding out that informative social influence, it didn't matter what evidence was being presented. The person wasn't necessarily going to agree until they could get out of it, because if they couldn't get out of, the voting, then they were going to sit in that jury room forever. And the severe price was nobody was going to like Mr. Angry. So an informative social influences. So Barron and his other colleagues, they made students do an eyewitness identification test. If the task was easy, like a lineup exposure of 5 seconds, conformity was pretty low. Now, when you started making the task more difficult with half a second exposure time, we actually saw conformity being pretty low. So what you see, is right here. And so what you would do is you would try and have your exposure there. And so when people were given the exposure for a little bit longer, they didn't conform as much as when they were given a very short task. So when you look at informative social influence, difficult judgments, easy judgments, when it's difficult, we actually see people conforming a little bit more. When it's easy judgments, you see less conformity. So Stanley Milgram is going to do his obedience study. And so Milgram is going to do probably one of a famous experiment. So what ends up happening is he wants to look at, do people follow authority figures? And how he comes up with it is that the Holocaust camps have been discovered, and so he wants to see what kind of made ordinary people obey orders, because when the Nuremberg trials were going on, all these people, all the SS officers were saying they were following orders, and that's why they were doing these terrible things to people, causing these war atrocities. So he sets up an experiment. What he did is he would have a teacher and a learner. And so the teacher would read some nonsense syllables, and the learner was in another room hooked up to an electrical machine. Now, of course, this is all fake. The person who is hooked up to the machine is an actor, and the person is going to kind of yell and scream, ow, that hurts, and stuff as they get shocked. So this person, the teacher, reads nonsense syllables, and the learner is supposed to memorize them and repeat them back. And every time the learner gets it wrong, the teacher is supposed to shock the learner. Now, this went on, and then you would have the actual scientist, the psychologist in the room, who's the authority figure, pushing the teacher to keep going. And so slight, moderate, strong, and then people really were giving the death shock. So as long as this teacher was felt pressured by this psychologist to keep going, they really did go, and a lot of them did give the fatal shot. So what they looked at is that a lot of people, the majority of subjects, continued all the way to obey, all the way to the end. There were very few people who did not, who actually quit. But you're looking at almost 70% of the experimenters, the people who were the teachers, went and gave the fatal shocks. Now, nobody died, but people were being put through severe stress during this experiment. So when we look at individual resistance, a third of individuals in Milgram's study actually resisted social coercion. So at least a third of them said, no, no more, I'm not going to do this, I walk out. And remember, when you're experimenting with humans, they are supposed to be able to get an out if they need to. So we look at Tiananmen Square. This unarmed individual single-handedly challenged the line of tanks. I mean, this guy is a beast, right? He stands here in front of the tanks, and he will not move. This is a rare individual who resists social coercion, because what he really, what everybody else has done, you see he's the only guy up here, everybody else has fled when the tanks came. So lessons from conformity and obedience studies. So in Ash's experiment with the lines in Milgram's study with the electrical shock, participants were pressured to follow their standards and be responsive to others. So in Milgram's study, participants were torn between hearing the patient's or the victim's pleas and the experimenter's orders. So people might have felt a little guilty, but they continue to go on and give the death shock. In ABC News 2020, they recreated Milgram's study, and you can look on it on the internet, and basically the results from the 1950s, 60s are the same that they are today. Like, nothing really changed.